Ready to go, everyone? Welcome to the City Council public hearing for November 15th. We have two public hearings this evening. I don't have any, no. So we'll just talk about what they are and get through them then. So the first public hearing is an ordinance concerning authority of traffic control officers. City Manager?
This is a public hearing concerning amendments to Eugene Code that would change the title of a community service specialist to a community service officer, providing authority to the CSO to direct traffic on the streets and public thoroughfares of the city. These amendments are necessary to provide authority for police department CSOs to direct traffic in situations concurrent with authority provided by state statute.
Thank you. I'm going to open the public hearing, and seeing no one here is signed up, I'm going to close the public hearing and ask if there are any questions or comments. Councilor Brown?
Thank you. Yeah, I just have a question, a couple of little questions here. It basically just seems to be mostly just a name change from specialist to officer. But I was kind of wondering about, the ticketing authority of parked vehicles and things like that. Does that happen very often?
More so with parking type violations than anything else. They have the authority to enforce animal regulations. They just because of the way their duties have kind of morphed over the years, they don't do much of that. It's primarily for the parking citations and traffic direction issues.
Yes, it all seems pretty straightforward to me. I was just kind of curious about that. And what about can they call for a boot or a tow?
We don't.
Or they leave that up to the
that's
traffic.
That's pretty much the booting of vehicles is usually left to parking control. But we can tow vehicles if they've been abandoned or a traffic hazard. They have that authority.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I don't see anyone else. No other questions? We'll move on to the next public hearing, and this is an ordinance concerning assessments for street improvements. City Manager?
Thanks, Mayor, and City Engineer Mark Schoening will provide introductory remarks on this item. We also want to just acknowledge the subcommittee, the council subcommittee of Councilors Taylor, Poling, and Solomon for the work that they did on this. So thank you very much.
Mark? Thank you. Mayor and members of the City Council, we had a work session on this topic in September, on September 22nd, and there was one issue that we reviewed that the subcommittee did not reach consensus on, and the council asked that we come back with options for you to consider after hearing public testimony. So it's that one issue is in changing the methodology of how properties are assessed. We went to a method of a residential assessment unit for residential properties, but for non-residential properties, we had two alternatives that the council had discussed. The current methodology is based upon front footage. So one was to continue that methodology in determining how to apportion cost among different non-residential properties. The second was area of properties, and then and those were outlined in a memo to the mayor and council that was in your packet last week. Mm-hmm. And we added a third one, a staff option, which combined both it was half based upon area and half based upon frontage. So those three options are outlined in that memo, and there's language in the ordinance that articulates those three options. So before a final ordinance can be drafted, we need council direction on that particular piece. There's a second option in the ordinance, and that has to do with properties that are on dead-end streets or cul-de-sacs when those streets are already improved. And the issue is whether those properties that are included in a local improvement district, should they be assessed at the same rate as properties that abut the street to be improved, or should they be assessed at a rate something less? And we suggested 1/2 the rate. So if you don't take any action or provide any direction on that, it would continue as it was in the work session, where properties that are on a cul-de-sac or a dead-end street that's already fully improved, but because it has to access the street being improved, they would be assessed at the same rate as properties on the street to be improved. So those are the two issues that came forward from the work session. One, we definitely need council direction on to finalize the ordinance, and the other is just an option that you could consider, but we've already got direction on dead-end properties on dead-end streets and cul-de-sacs.
So then, Mark, why don't you read the first one again, and then we'll see if we got some answers for you from council. The first
Okay.
one that you wanted to know about.
The first one was, and again, when we had the work session, you wanted to hear public testimony in the event that that might guide your decision. But the first one was how to apportion cost among non-residential properties. And the choices were frontage, which is the current method, so it would be continuing that and being consistent with the current code, even though we're making substantial changes. The second would be area, and the third would be a combination of area and frontage.
Okay, we've got one person signed up, and maybe that person has something to say about one of these, so we'll let that person speak first, and then we'll come back and ask if there are comments, and council can give you some direction. So I'm going to open the public hearing, and the person who wants to speak has submitted this form, and prior to the beginning of the public hearing. And when you come up, please give your name, city of residence, and for Eugene residents, if you know your ward, please indicate that. You have 3 minutes to comment. There are lights on the podium. The yellow light indicates you have 15 seconds to complete your comments. The red light indicates the end of 3 minutes. And so we invite to come up and speak to us, Marguerite Zolman.
My name is Marguerite Zolman. I live at 1174 Sheraton Drive, Eugene. Representing Harlow Neighborhood Association, I rise to speak in support of the proposed ordinance to make it easier for property owners to afford the expensive cost of rebuilding the city's roughest streets. Arcadia Drive is a deplorable road inherited from the county that was never engineered. Because it is only asphalt on dirt, the street needs sidewalks, gutters, storm drains, the works. About half of Arcadia, a few summers ago, the city applied an asphalt overlay to Arcadia. About half of Arcadia Drive between Harlow and the beginning of the Meltebeck homes was never completed. When inquiries were made of the city, no one had an answer as to why. When Harlow neighbors asked about the status of Arcadia, we were told that it has none, as it is not a collector street. Every property on Arcadia Drive must use Arcadia to exit the neighborhood. Every property east of Arcadia, with a few exceptions, must use Arcadia to exit the neighborhood. If this does not constitute a collector street, please tell me what does. The Department of Public Works has stated that the Harlow neighborhood already has the Van Dyne Bogart connector, which does not service the Arcadia area and cannot be considered a connector for Arcadia and the streets east of it. My question, is it chiseled in concrete somewhere that a neighborhood is allowed only one collector street? Also, the Department of Public Works said that there have, quote, been a few inquiries as to the process of reclassifying Arcadia, but there has been no concerted effort, unquote. How much concerted effort would you like? The new ordinance would divide the cost of fixing Arcadia among all who have to use it to exit the neighborhood, with the cost becoming a lien against the property which needn't be satisfied until the property changes ownership. I urge you to adopt this ordinance and fix Arcadia Drive before there is a fatality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to close the public hearing and ask council, first of all, do you have any questions you want to ask? And then we'll try to get Mark's questions answered for him. Any questions or comments? Just thank you for coming very much. And Councilor Colling.
Yes. Thank you very much, ma'am, for showing up this evening. The Arcadia Drive issue is something that I've been involved in since 2003. Previous city managers, I have gone to them and asked if there is a traffic study or anything that we could do to get Arcadia reclassified, and kind of like the Harlow Neighborhood Association, I just kind of went up against a brick wall and got nowhere with it. I haven't approached that subject with the current city manager yet, because after hitting your head so many times against a brick wall, you stop when it starts hurting. So maybe it's time we start that discussion again. I don't know. Maybe one of our public works people can answer this. Is a neighborhood only allowed one collector street? And how do we get a street changed, the classification of a street changed?
There's not a limit on the number of collectors that any particular neighborhood can have, and we haven't pursued a reclassification of Arcadia because we didn't see we went through a citywide process with the and classified all of the streets, which made sense because we're working with the transportation network, with the exception of the Crest Drive area, and we resolved that issue a year ago. But I didn't particularly see the benefit of going to the expense of doing traffic studies and outreaching to the neighborhood to change the classification from a local street to perhaps a neighborhood collector. It didn't seem worth the time and expense to do that when the issue is really the street's unimproved and should be improved to urban standards, and the street classification really doesn't prevent that from happening.
Well, since they punched the north end of Arcadia through a number of years ago into the Meltebeck subdivision, they changed the whole makeup of that entire neighborhood as far as traffic is concerned. I live in the Harlow Neighborhood Association. I've walked that street for many, many years, and I've seen the increase of traffic. I watch the traffic every day coming off of there, because eventually it'll either come out on Willakinsey at Regency, or can't think of the other street, or at Kingston, which I can see out my back window. So I don't know, Mr. City Manager, is it possible that we can just get a study on just one street and not have to go through a reclassification study of all the streets in the city? It's time we did something with that.
I'm going to have to get back to you because I don't know enough of the detail and the information, so we can get back to you. One of the questions that I think will be good to circle back is what's the intent of classifying it as a collective versus the way it is? If the issue is the condition of the street, then we want to make sure we talk about that. If it's if the classification has some other meaning, it'd be good to understand that a little bit better too. But I'll have to get back with you after spending some time with Public Works.
Thank you.
Councilor Ortiz?
Thank you, Mayor. So, Mark, can you just describe the because recently we did Elmira Road, and that was classified as a collector street. The people were still assessed, but it was only a certain depth of what that was charged to what fund?
For streets that are other than local streets, so neighborhood and major collectors and major arterials, property owners are assessed, or residential property owners are assessed for the equivalent depth of a residential street.
Mm-hmm.
So an arterial street's going to have a much thicker section because it carries more traffic and heavier traffic. So the idea is that property owners, the last time the council 10 years ago looked at the assessment code, they wanted to look at livability, and one of that was that it wasn't as livable to live on a major street as a local street. So how do you account for that? One was, well, you shouldn't have to pay more than the depth of asphalt it would take to do a local street. And then the width of paving was also different on different classifications of street. How much of that paving width was assessed to property owners? So one of the differences between arterials and collectors and local streets is that for the city share of the cost, we have transportation SDCs, or we did until the recession. Those have dropped off substantially, but that was how we paid for the city's share of the assessment projects. For local streets, we don't have that identified funding source. With Crest, we had a unique opportunity when we transferred general fund money to the county, and they transferred road fund to the city several years ago, and we used that as the source of funds for the city share of the Crest Drive project.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilor Taylor?
Okay, I'll ask Mark one more question. The people on, that were, this street that's being talked about, they wouldn't gain anything if it were classified as collector, would they?
I'm not,
They wouldn't gain anything, they wouldn't be assessed any less if we reclassified the street?
no, it wouldn't, it's not, no, I don't think so.
Wouldn't be any advantage. Okay, and then that's the only question I have. And then I hope that we will approve the ordinance in keeping with the committee's recommendations as far as we made them, and that on the item in which we did not agree, I still think it would be better to assess the non-residential properties according to area. And I will probably make a motion to that effect later, but we'll see what other people think. Thank you.
Councilor Zelenka? Did I hear him?
Yes, I joined a little while ago.
So did you have any question you wanted to ask?
I don't have any questions.
All right. So now I think we're, whoops, it lit up. All right, Councilor Polling?
One quick question. Is the assessment less for a neighborhood collector than it is a residential street? If it were to go from an unimproved to an improved road, would the assessment be less?
It would depend on the exact nature of the improvement. So
I'm sorry, can you speak up a little bit? I'm having.
it would depend on the exact nature of the improvement. It could. I mean, the theory behind the existing code is that regardless of the street classification, everyone pays roughly the same, with the exception is when you get into the higher classifications, major collector and arterial. But if it went from a local street to a neighborhood collector, you would, and a neighborhood collector properties are assessed for 10 feet width of paving, and a local street they're assessed for the full width, but it's likely that street would be 20 feet wide in paving, so it would be they'd be assessed for the full width regardless of the street classification.
Thank you.
Councilor Clark?
Thank you, Mark. Just because you asked, I'd like you to know that I favor the frontage approach. So that helps with the process of what we're putting together.
One area and one frontage. Okay. Councilor Brown?
What was the idea, I mean, do you have a notion of how you would do the combination of frontage and area? Have you been working on formula?
Yes, and that was illustrated in that memo.
Oh, we did have, okay.
Right.
Yeah, I tried to find that, I couldn't find it. I thought maybe it was. Okay, well, I'll dig it out then, thanks.
The issue, though, is Mark is seeking direction from you guys tonight. So, I heard one person say area and one person say frontage. You can't. I think what you said, Mark, is that you can't put the ordinance together unless you know what people want you to put in it, right? That's the
correct.
deal.
Right.
Okay. So, if you aren't ready to do this, it just means it'll take him that much longer to put the ordinance together. So I'm just asking. I'm looking down to my left here and asking if Councilor Ortiz is ready to.
No, I'm not ready.
Okay, and you're not ready. And Councilor Zelenka, are you ready to give any direction on this?
I'd like to think about it a little more.
Okay, what I'm hearing, I think, is people don't seem to be ready to give you direction tonight, which probably means we need to circle back. Don't write it yet.
Okay.
I think we'll need to circle back around and come to some kind of conclusion at a work session after everybody has a chance to review it. It looks like to me. Councilor Polling.
Well, I actually favor the half frontage, half area-based formula. I think it's kind of striking a middle ground. And if you look at the examples given, there's not that much difference in the cost of the assessment based on the examples that you gave us. So I kind of go with the half frontage and half area based. And Mark, as far as the other part is the properties on already improved cul-de-sacs and dead-end streets, I'm willing to give it a little wiggle room as to a reduction in the assessment that those people have to pay, but the fact is they still, in certain circumstances, still have to use that street to get out of their neighborhoods. And again, I'm going back to the Arcadia Drive, for the example. You got all those side streets that the only way you can access either Willackenzie or Harlow Road is get out of your driveway, drive on your street until you hit Arcadia. So maybe 75%, but I don't know about half as much. So that's my opinion on that one.
Counselor Taylor.
I don't think we have time to come back again. How much time would that take? We've been at this for a long time already.
If we were to try to pick it up as a work session,
Right before Thanksgiving,
yeah, there's the Wednesday before Thanksgiving.
that you were going to not have to come.
I think we need to get it done, and also out of respect to Jennifer, who wants to get it done before she leaves the council and was one of the committee members, I think we should, and we did spend a lot of time and effort on this, I think we should try to get it done before the end of the year. I think we discussed a lot the assessment of people who are on cul-de-sacs and dead ends, and there's no doubt in my mind that they benefit just as much, and they maybe more, because they don't have the disadvantage of putting up with the construction and sometimes having the street widened and things messed up in front of their houses. So I am not willing to give on that. As for the combination area and frontage, I'm willing to accept that if that will get us somewhere.
Oh, that's two with a combination. Let's see, City Attorney, did you have something you wanted to say?
I just had a quick
Okay.
thought. One other option is we could come back with 3 different ordinances at your,
That's crazy. A lot of work.
whichever one we're on the 13th of December. One for each one of the frontage area and the hybrid, and then,
That's the last meeting, isn't it?
so that would be the
Okay.
other option.
All right, if you're willing to do that. It sounds like people need more time. Counselor Clark?
Thank you, Mayor. I also just want to say on principle, I don't think I can support, although I recognize that there's probably votes for it at the table, the idea of charging those in dead-end streets and cul-de-sacs for assessments, even if they live on already improved streets. And the principle is that they paid for the curbs and the improvements in front of their house, and they shouldn't have to pay twice. It's wrong to charge some people twice and some people not, just because of the kind of street they live on. So I don't think I can support that.
Counselor Solomon?
Yes, I would support the half frontage and half area-based assessments for the non-residential units. And then as to this question about improvements or assessments to cul-de-sacs and dead-end streets, when we talked about it at the committee, it was pretty much 100% that we wanted them to be assessed, because they do benefit from the improvements. But I guess if it helps the group keep moving, I'd be willing to support perhaps 75%. But this a 50% reduction, I thought was too much and wasn't fair, but I'd be willing to go to 75.
Counselor Taylor?
Well, I'd like to vote on that part tonight, if possible, but I think this will never be fair. It isn't fair to assess people, actually. It's never going to be totally fair. But people who, in the case of Crest, for example, it's too late to help them, but the people who were many of the people who were most insistent on repairing those streets were ones that do not live on them and will not pay anything. And I think there's no doubt that the people who have to use them for access benefit as much as anyone else does. And if they've already paid, that's unfortunate.
Counselor Pryor?
Thank you. Part of the reason why this is challenging is, trying to weigh in your mind the issue of who benefits versus how you should charge. And I'm kind of inclined to if I have to go down a street, pun intended, What Jennifer is saying is probably where I would have to go if I had to make a decision right now. So if you want to know kind of where my thinking is going. One question I do have, though, is not with regard to dead-end streets, but with regard to cul-de-sacs, how often do you have an improved cul-de-sac going off of an unimproved street? Does that happen a lot? I think this question may have been asked before.
That happens. That's fairly common.
So it is fairly common. Okay. So Councilor Clark's concern is one that you would encounter not infrequently, but you would encounter it fairly often.
Yes.
Councilor Clark.
And also, is there a distinction by the name of the street? For example, there are cul-de-sacs that have their own individual street name, and there are cul-de-sacs that have simple numbering from the part of the larger street. So is there a difference in type of cul-de-sac based on how it's named or how it's numbered?
No, not with regard to the ordinance before you.
Only because it includes all of them, but if it didn't include all of them, as it exists right now, do those who live in a cul-de-sac with numbered names to the frontage street, are they charged where those who lived in a cul-de-sac with its own individual name wouldn't be?
No.
Okay, thanks.
Okay,
Mayor, can I get in the queue?
Yep, you're queued. Go.
Well, I guess my concern is the cul-de-sac that just redid their cul-de-sac and the street was unimproved, and then they end up having to pay for the street as well. And I guess that presents a problem for me, and I'm wondering if there couldn't be kind of a two-tiered kind of system of calculating the cost that takes that in consideration, where if they the worst case, I think, would be where they have to pay for it twice. And if there was a tiered system where the cul-de-sac people who have already done their improvement and brought it up to city standards, and then the street does it, that they could get some kind of differential from just a regular formula, which I think should be a mix of both frontage and square area.
Thank you, Alan. So, Councilor Zelinka. Are you, Councilor Zelinka, did you hear the 75% they were talking about here at the table?
The hybrid option.
Yeah, I don't know about 75%.
Yeah.
The flag lots are the kind of problems that I come up against, where they have a very narrow frontage and a huge lot. How do you deal with that? I think maybe, I was thinking more along 50-50, but...
Councilor Taylor.
We took care of the flag lots when we decided that every residence on the street would pay the same regardless of their frontage. So we're not even talking about flag lots now, unless someone wants to bring it up again. But the cul-de-sacs, have cul-de-sacs ever established a local improvement district and improved just a cul-de-sac?
Not that I'm aware of.
It sounds like something that's not likely to happen. And I can't imagine that somebody would do that.
Well, I have not gotten any motion from anybody, so I get the idea that you want to wait and work on this at the next meeting. Okay. All righty. With that, I think I closed the hearing, and so we're done with the business of the day. Thank you all.
Thank you.